Alright, hello everybody, welcome to another edition of Painting of the Week. This week's video is going to be probably a little bit shorter, and then we're probably not going to have a video next week just because it's exams, and who knows if I'll actually have time to get around to making one. But the painting we're looking at this week is very similar to the painting that we looked at last week, Edvard Munch's Evening on Karl Johan, so if you haven't watched that video, I strongly encourage you to go back and watch that one first, so that my analysis of this one will make a little bit more sense. We are looking at the Moulin Rouge by the French post-impressionist Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. This was painted in 1892, actually between 92 and about 95. This is oil on canvas, and it's in Chicago at the Art Institute of Chicago. So if you're ever there, I would highly encourage you to make sure that you make it a point to check this painting out. Lautrec liked to paint the interior of the Moulin Rouge, that sort of infamous Parisian cabaret, which was constructed in 1889. This particular painting, which is probably his most famous scene from the Moulin Rouge, depicts a group of three gentlemen there. They're all wearing hats of some sort, and two ladies that are sitting around a table. And in the foreground, we have this additional woman who appears sort of to be sliding onto the canvas, onto the right-hand side of the canvas, and she's looking directly at the viewer. The most remarkable attribute of this painting is that the faces of all the women are heavily made up, so heavily made up, to the point of almost being grotesque, of almost making them look like zombies. And also in the foreground, but on the opposite side, we have this very large bar, which is cutting us off from the conversation that's going on at the table. And the entire composition, and this bar has a lot to do with it, feels very cold, very isolating, as if the viewer isn't really a part of the action that's going on, even though we are here at the Moulin Rouge. We're not actually actively participating in what's happening here. The bar itself looks somewhat distorted, and that's because the picture plane has been turned up somewhat, which is a technique that was borrowed from the Impressionists. It was originally actually used in Japanese woodblock printing, and then the French Impressionists borrowed that technique, and we see it utilized here in post-impressionism as well. The effect is to make the viewer feel as if he's almost toppling over the bar, as if we're sort of looking down on the scene or tipping over. There's an abstracted background here, as you can see when we look beyond the table where the conversation is happening. We see a few additional figures standing, and then what appears to be mirrors on the wall reflecting other parts of the dining room, but the abstraction is so heavy, what we would call atmospheric perspective, that the viewer's attention is really focused primarily into the foreground where this conversation is happening, albeit a conversation that we're not a part of. The lighting here is also exceptionally important. There's an artificial light on these women's faces. One of the women, of course, is turned away from us, so we can't see her. But if we look at the other woman at the table and the woman who has sort of described as sliding onto the canvas, you can see this artificial light, which is illuminating the faces of these women and endowing them with sort of this additional layer of mask-like gloom and creepiness. So the reason I said that this painting is very similar to the Munch painting that we looked at last week is that this is really another good example of expressionism. So instead of going through and breaking down what expressionism is again and kind of relating the different aspects and facets of that to this painting, I want you to do that yourself. And I'm going to ask some guiding questions here to maybe direct your thinking a little bit. And hopefully, like I said, if you've watched last week's video, you'll be able to kind of analyze this painting yourself. I've done sort of the basics. I've done a descriptive analysis, but I want you to look now at how this specifically relates to the tenets of expressionism. So think about, how do the artistic techniques that Lautrec has used here contribute to the feelings of anxiety and paranoia, specifically in the context of urbanization and social life in Paris? How is this painting in some ways threatening to the viewer? Think specifically about, as I said, the artificial lighting and sort of the zombie-like attribute of these women's faces being so heavily made up. And how are color and lighting and a distortion of vision used expressively in this painting to reveal the dark side of human nature? These are all questions that Expressionism attempts to answer, and these are all questions that I believe Toulouse-Lautrec explores in this painting.